Dr. Jung, we have been discussing in some detail some of the factors in the development of the personality of the individual, and you have very kindly elaborated for us on some of your fundamental concepts, such as the archetype and at least simply what it means, and certain types of archetypes such as the anima and the animus. And we try to show, perhaps in our discussion, some of the ways that your ideas may have differed from those of Dr. Freud. Now, another concept or idea that seems to be a very interesting one in your work, at least as I see it, is the term or concept persona. And of course, this seems to have a lot of relevance to the daily living of the individual. I wonder if you would mind telling us a little bit about how you construe this term persona.
Well, this is a practical concept we need in elucidating people's relation. I noticed with my patients, particularly with people that are in public life, that they have a certain way of presenting themselves. For instance, take the doctor. He has a certain way. For instance, he has good bedside manners, and he behaves as one expects a doctor behaves. He may even identify himself with it and believe that he is what he appears to be.
Yes.
He must appear in a certain form, unless people don't believe that he is a doctor. And so when he's a professor, he's also supposed to behave in a certain way so that it is plausible that he is a professor, you know. So the persona is partially the result of the demands society has. And on the other side, it is a compromise with what one likes to be, or with what, or as one likes to appear. Say.
Yes.
Take, for instance, a parson. He also has his particular manner, and as corresponding to the general expectation, and he behaves also in another way, combined with his persona that is forced upon him by society, in such a way that also his fiction of himself, his idea about himself, is more or less portrayed or represented. So the persona is a certain complicated system of behavior which is partially dictated by society and partially dictated by the expectations or the wishes one nurses oneself.
Yes.
Now, this is not the real personality, in spite of the fact that people will assure you that that is all quite real and quite honest, yet it is not.
Yes.
Now, such a performance, or say, the performance of the persona is quite all right, as long as you know that you are not identical with the way in which you appear.
Yes.
But if you are unconscious of this fact, then you get into sometimes very disagreeable conflicts. Namely, people can't help noticing that at home, for instance, you are quite different from what you appear to be in public.
Yes.
And people who don't know it stumble over it in the end. They deny that they are like that, but they are like that. They are it. And then you don't know, now, which is the real man?
Yes, yes.
Is he the man as he is at home or in intimate relations, or is he the man that appears in public? It is a question of Jekyll and Hyde.
Yes.
Often.
Yes.
It is such, occasionally there is such a difference that you would almost be able to speak of the double personality.
Yes.
And the more that is pronounced, the more people are neurotic.
Yes.
They get neurotic because they have two different ways. They contradict themselves all the time, And in as much as they are unconscious of themselves, they don't know it. They think they're all one. Everybody sees that they are two.
Yeah.
And some know him only from one side, so others know him only from the other side. And then there are situations that clash, because the way you are creates certain situations with people in your relations, and these two situations don't chime in, they are just dissonances.
Yes, yes.
And the more that is the case, the more the people are neurotic.
Yes. Actually, would you say that the individual may even have more than two personas? In other words, could he possibly...
Oh, rarely. You know,
rarely.
we can't afford it very well to play more than two roles. But there are cases, for instance, where people have up to 5 different personalities.
Yes.
In cases of dissociation of personality, where, for instance, the one person, say, call it person A, doesn't know of the existence of the person B, but B knows of A.
Yes.
Or there may be a third personality, C, that doesn't know of the two others.
Yes.
You see, there are such cases in literature.
Yes.
They are rare.
Very
the
rare.
ordinary case is just an ordinary dissociation of a personality.
Yes.
One calls that a systematic dissociation,
Yes.
in contradistinction to the chaotic or unsystematic dissociation you find in schizophrenia.
Yes. Now, you distinguish between the term persona and the term ego. In other words, as you see them, they're two different things.
Yes?
Yes.
Oh,
now,
yes.
what is the difference between the term ego, as you see it, and the term
Well,
persona?
you see, the ego is supposed to be the representative of the real person. But as I say, for instance, in the case where B knows of A, but A doesn't know of B,
Yes.
in that case, one would say the ego is more on the side of C.
Yes.
Because the ego has a more complete knowledge, and
Yes.
A is a split-off personality.
Yes. Now, you also use the term self.
Yes.
Now, the word self, then, would this have a different meaning than, say, ego or
Oh, yes,
persona?
oh, quite, oh, yes. You see, when I say self, then you mustn't think of I myself, because that is only your empirical self, and
Yes.
that is covered by the term ego.
Ego, yes.
But when it is matter of the self, then it is matter of a personality that is more complete than the ego, because the ego is only consists of what you are conscious of.
Yes, yes. Your awareness.
Yeah, what you know to be yourself. For instance, in our example, B that knows A, and A doesn't know B, B is relatively in the position of the self.
Yes.
Namely, the self is on the one side the ego, on the other side the unconscious personality, which everybody is in the possession of. Everybody, not in the possession. Very often it is just the other way around, that the unconscious is in possession of consciousness.
Yes, yes.
But that is a different case. Now, you see, while I am talking, I'm conscious of what I say.
Yes.
I'm conscious of myself, yet only to a certain extent. Quite a lot of things happen. For instance, I make gestures. I'm not conscious of them.
Yes.
They happen unconsciously. You can see them.
Yes.
I may say or use words, and I can't remember at all having used those words, or even at the moment I'm not conscious of them.
Yes.
So any amount of unconscious things occur in my conscious condition. I'm never wholly conscious of myself.
Yes.
While I'm trying, for instance, to elaborate an argument, at the same time, there are unconscious processes that continue, perhaps a dream, which I had the last night.
Yes.
Or a part of myself thinks of God knows what.
Yes.
Or of a trip I'm going to take, or of such and such people I have seen, or when I am at writing a paper, I'm continuing writing that paper in my mind without knowing it.
Yeah.
You can discover these things, say, in dreams, or if you are clever in immediate observation of an individual, then you see in the gestures or in the expression in the face that there is what one calls une arrière-pensée,
yes.
something behind consciousness.
Yes.
So that you have finally the feeling, well, that man has something up his sleeve.
Yes.
And you can even ask him now, what are you really thinking of? You're thinking all the time something else, yet he's not conscious of it. Or he may be. There are, of course, great individual differences. There are individuals who have amazing knowledge of themselves, of the things that go on in themselves. But even those people wouldn't be capable of knowing what is going on in their unconscious.
Yes.
For instance, they are not conscious of the fact that while they live a conscious life, all the time a myth is played in the unconscious. A myth that extends over centuries.
Yes.
Namely, archetypal ideas, a stream of archetypal ideas that goes on through one individual, through the centuries.
Yes.
You see, it is like a continuous stream,
yes.
and that comes then to the daylight in the great movements.
Yes.
Say in political movements or in spiritual movements. For instance, in the time before Reformation, people dreamt of the great change, and that's the reason why such great transformations could be predicted.
Yes.
If somebody has been clever enough to see what is going on in people's mind, in the unconscious mind,
yes.
Would be able to predict it. For instance, I have predicted the Nazi rising in Germany through the observation of my German patients.
Yes.
They had dreams in which the whole thing was anticipated.
Yes.
And with considerable detail. And I was already absolutely certain in the years before Hitler came, in the beginning of the, well, I could say the year 1919, I was sure that something was threatening in Germany, something very big and very catastrophic. And I only knew it through the observation of the unconscious. You see, there is something very particular in the different nations. And this is a peculiar fact that the archetype of the anima plays a very great role in Western literature, French and Anglo-Saxon,
yes.
not in Germany.
Yes.
There are exceedingly few examples in German literature where the anima plays a role.
Yes.
You know, that simply comes from the fact that not one woman is buried unless she is buried as Alt-Kaminfegersgattin, at least.
Yes. Yes.
She must have a title, otherwise she hasn't existed.
That's right. That's right.
And so you see, it is just as if, now mind you, this is a bit drastic, but it illustrates my point. In Germany, there are no women. There is Frau Doktor, Frau Professor, Frau Kommerzienrat, the grandmother, the mother-in-law, the grandfather, father, the son, the daughter, the sister. No woman.
Yes. Yes, I see.
La femme.
La femme.
Ça n'existe pas.
Doesn't exist. Well,
it is the idea,
yeah.
you see. Now that is an enormously important fact, which shows that in the German mind there is going on a particular myth, something very particular.
Yeah.
And psychologists really should look out for these things.
Yeah.
But they prefer to think that I am a prophet.
Yes.
Ha!
Now, just in the same context of journey, this is, of course, a very interesting and remarkable set of statements here. How would you look at Hitler in this light? Would you see him as a personification, a symbol of the Father?
Oh, well, no.
No.
Not at all.
I know.
No, you see, I couldn't possibly explain that very complicated fact Hitler represents. It is too complicated, you know. He is a hero figure.
Yeah.
And the hero figure is far more important than any fathers that have ever existed.
I see. Much broader than
No, he
the
was
immediate
not a
father
father
figure.
at all. Not at all. He was a hero
Yeah.
in the German myth.
Yeah.
And, mind you, a religious hero. He was a savior.
Yes.
He was meant to be a savior. That is why they put his photo upon the altars.
Yes.
Even.
Yes.
Or somebody declared on his tombstone that he is happy that his eyes have beheld Hitler.
Yeah.
And now he can die in peace. Oh, he's just the hero myth, you know.
Yeah. Now, getting back to the idea of the self, and the self incorporates these unconscious factors. The self incorporates these unconscious
The self
factors.
is merely a term that designates the whole personality. Because the whole personality of man is indescribable.
Yes.
His consciousness can be described. His unconscious cannot be described because the unconscious, as I must repeat myself, is always unconscious.
Yes.
And it is really unconscious, but really does not know it.
Does not know about it.
And so we don't know our unconscious personality. We have hints, we have certain ideas, but we don't know it really. Nobody can say where man ends. And that is the beauty of it, you know.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
The unconscious of man can reach God knows where. There we are going to make discoveries.
Now, another set of ideas, which of course are very, very well known to the world, that of course you have originated, center around the terms introversion and extroversion.
Yeah.
And I know that you're aware of the fact that these terms have now become so widely known that the man on the street is using these terms constantly, describing his wife or his friends and so on and so forth. It's become probably the most used psychological concepts by the layman that we have.
Oh, like the word complex. I have invented it too.
Yes,
from their
that's right.
association experiments.
Yes, that's right.
Well, you see, this is simply practical because there are certain people who definitely are more influenced by their surroundings than by their own intentions. While there are other people who are more influenced by the subjective factor. Now you see, the subjective factor, that's very characteristic, was understood by Freud as a sort of pathological autoerotism.
Yes, yes.
Now this is a mistake. You know, we have, the psyche has two conditions, two important conditions. The one is the environmental influence,
yes.
and the other is the given fact of the psyche as it is born. The psyche is by no means tabula rasa. We are a definite mixture and combination of genes.
Yes.
And they are there from the very first moment of our life. And they give a definite character, even to the little child. And that is a subjective factor, looked at from the outside. Now, if you look at it from the inside,
Yes.
then it is just so as if you would observe the world.
Yes.
When you observe the world, you see people, you see houses, you see the sky, you see tangible objects. But when you observe yourself within, you see moving images,
Yes.
a world of images,
Yes.
generally known as fantasies.
Fantasies.
Yet these fantasies are facts. You see, it is a fact that a man has such and such a fantasy. And it is such a tangible fact, for instance, that when a man has a certain fantasy, another man may lose his life.
Yes.
Or a bridge is built.
Yes.
These houses were all fantasies.
Yes.
Everything you do here, all
That's
of
right.
houses, everything was fantasy to begin with. And fantasy has a proper reality. That is not to be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. It is of course not a tangible object, but it is a fact nevertheless. It is, say, a form of energy,
Yes.
Despite the fact we can't measure it.
Yes.
It is a manifestation of something.
Yes.
And that is a reality, that is just a reality as, for instance, the peace treaty of Versailles or something like that. It is no more, you can't show it.
Yes.
But it has been a fact.
Yes. Yes.
And so the psychical events are facts, are realities. And when you observe the stream of images within, you observe an aspect of the world.
Yes.
Of the world within. Because the psyche, you know, if you understand it as a phenomenon that takes place in so-called living bodies, then it is a quality of matter. As our body consists of matter, we discovered that this matter has another aspect, namely a psychic aspect.
Yes. Yes.
And so it is simply the world from within, seen from within.
Yes.
It is just as if we were seeing into another aspect of matter.
Yes.
This is an idea that is not my invention. That the old Democritus already said, talked of the spiritus insertus atomis,
Yes.
namely the spirit that is inserted in atoms.
Yes. Yes.
That means psyche is a quality that appears in matter. Doesn't matter whether we understand it or not,
Yes.
but this is the conclusion we come to if we draw conclusions without prejudices.
Yes.
And so, you see, the man who is going by the external world, by the influences of the external world, say society or perceptions, sense perceptions, thinks that he is more valid, you know, because this is valid, this is real. And the man who goes by the subjective factor is not valid because subjective factor is nothing.
Yeah.
No, that man is just as well based, because he is bases himself upon the world from within.
Yeah.
And so he is quite right, even if he says, oh, this is nothing but my fantasy, you know.
Yeah.
And of course that is the introvert. And that the introvert is always afraid of the external world. He will tell you, when you ask him, he will be apologetic about it.
Yeah.
He will say, of course, yes, I know those are my fantasies. And he has always a resentment. And as the world in general, particularly America, is extroverted like hell, the introvert has no place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he doesn't know that he beholds the world from within.
Yeah.
And that gives him dignity, and that gives him certainty, because it is, nowadays particularly, the world hangs on a thin thread,
Yeah.
and that is the psyche of man. Assume that certain fellows in Moscow lose their nerve or their common sense for a bit, and the whole world is in fire and flames.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see? It is, nowadays we are not threatened by elementary catastrophes. There is no such thing as an H-bomb. That is all man's doing.
Yeah.
We are the great danger. The psyche is the great danger. What if something goes wrong with the psyche?
Yeah. Yeah.
See? And so you see, it is demonstrated to us in our days what the power of the psyche is of man. How important it is to know something about it, but we know nothing about it. Nobody would give credit to the idea that the psychical processes of the ordinary man have any importance whatever. One thinks, oh, he has just what he has in his head. It is all from his surrounding. He's taught such a thing, believes such a thing. And particularly if he's well housed and well fed, then he has no ideas at all. And that's the great mistake. Because he is just that as which he is born, and he is not born as tabula rasa, but as a reality.
Yes. Yes. Now, of course, one of the very common, I think, misconceptions of your work among some of the writers in America has been that they had sort of characterized your discussions of introversion and extroversion as suggesting that the world was made up of only two kinds of people, introverts on one hand and extroverts on the other. And I'm sure you've been aware of, in many of our people looking at things this way. And of course, would you like to comment about that? In other words, would you perceive the world being made up of only people or extreme introverts, people that are extreme extroverts?
Well, Bismarck once said, God may protect me against my friends. With my enemies, I can deal myself alone. You know how people are. They catch a word, and then everything is schematized along that word. There is no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert.
Yes.
Such a man would be in the lunatic asylum. Those are only terms to designate a certain penchant, a certain tendency. For instance, the tendency to be more influenced by environmental influences or more influenced by the subjective factor. That's all.
Yes.
And you see, there are people who are very well balanced and are just as much influenced from within as they are from without,
yes.
or just as little.
Yes.
And so with all the finer classifications, yes. They are only sort of point de repère, points for orientation.
Certainly then, this whole matter of extremes, introversion and extroversion, as you say, it's sort of a schematic approach to sort of hang an idea on, an approach.
Yeah.
But it would be, as you say, ridiculous to say
you
that
see,
people...
my whole scheme of typology is merely a sort of orientation. Namely, there is such a factor as introversion, there is such a factor as extroversion. The classification of individuals means nothing at all. This is only the instrumentarium,
yes.
for the practical psychologists, yes. To explain, for instance, a husband to a wife, or yes. Vice versa. For instance, it is very often the case, one could almost say, it is almost a rule, but I don't want to make too many rules, you see, in order not to be schematic,
yeah.
That an introvert marries an extrovert for compensation, or another type marries the counter type to complement himself, for instance.
Well, Dr. Jung, of course, tied in with your typology and quotation marks of introversion and extroversion, we, of course, know of your concepts of thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. And, of course, it would be very interesting to hear some expansion of the meaning of these particular terms as related to the introvert-extrovert dichotomy.
Well, there is quite a simple explanation of these terms, and it shows at the same time how I arrived at such a typology. Namely, sensation tells you that there is something. Thinking, roughly speaking, tells you what it is. Feeling tells you whether it is agreeable or not, to be accepted or not, accepted or rejected.
Yes.
And intuition, now there is a difficulty.
Yes.
You don't know ordinarily how intuition works. So when a man has a hunch, you can't tell exactly how he got at that hunch or where that hunch comes from. It is something funny about intuition. I will tell you a little story. I had two patients the man was a sensation type, and the woman was an intuitive type. Of course, they felt attraction. And so they took a little boat and went out to the lake of Zurich. And there were those birds that dive after fish, you know.
Yeah.
And then after a certain time they come up again, and you can't tell where they come up. And so they began to bet who was the first to see the bird. Now, you would think that the one who observes reality very carefully, the sensation type, would of course win out.
Yeah.
Not at all. The woman won the bet completely.
Yeah.
She was beating him on all points.
Yeah.
Because by intuition she knew it before.
I see.
See? Now, how is that possible?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes, you know, you can really find out how it works by finding the intermediate links. You see, it is a perception by intermediate links, and you only get the result of that whole chain of associations.
Yes.
Sometimes you succeed in finding out, but more often you don't. So my definition is, intuition is a perception by ways or means of the unconscious.
Yes.
That is as near as I can get. Now this is a very important function, because when you live under primitive conditions, a lot of unpredictable things are likely to happen.
Yes.
And there you need your intuition, because you cannot possibly tell by your perceptions, by your sense perceptions, what there is going to happen. For instance, you are traveling in primeval forest. You only see for a few steps ahead. Mm-hmm. You go by the compass, perhaps, and you don't know what there is ahead. It is uncharted country. If you use your intuition, then you have hunches. And when you live under such primitive conditions, you instantly are aware of hunches. For instance, there are places that are favorable, there are places that are not favorable. You can't tell for your life what it is.
Yes.
But you better follow these hunches.
Yes.
Because anything can happen. You see, and, quite unforeseen things. For instance, at the end of a long day, you approach a river, and you don't know that there is a river. Yet, when you come to the river, that is quite unexpected. For miles there is no human habitation. You cannot swim across. It's all full of crocodiles. So what? You see? Now, such an obstacle hasn't been foreseen. But it may be that you have had a hunch, that you remained in the last likely spot, and that you wait for the following day, that you can build a raft or something of the sort, or look out for possibilities. For instance, you also can have intuitions that constantly happens in our jungle called a city.
Yes.
You can have a hunch something is going wrong, particularly when you are driving an automobile.
Yeah.
For instance, it is a day where nurses appear in the street.
Yes.
And they always try to get something interesting like a suicide, you know, to be run over. That's what marvelous, apparently.
Yes.
And then, you know, you get a peculiar feeling. And really, at the next corner already is a second nurse that runs in front of the automobile.
Yeah.
You see? Duplicity of cases, you know. That is a rule, you know, that such chance happenings come in groups.
Yeah.
And so you see, we have constantly warnings, hints that are consists perhaps in a slight feeling of uneasiness, uncertainty, fear. Now, under primitive circumstances, you pay attention to these things. They mean something. With us in our man-made, absolutely, apparently safe conditions, we don't need that function so very much.
Yes.
Yet we still use it. So you find intuitive types, for instance, amongst bankers, Wall Street men.
Yeah.
They follow hunches, you know, gamblers of all descriptions.
Yeah.
You find the type very frequently among doctors, because it helps them in their prognosis. Sometimes a case can look quite normal, as it were, and you don't foresee any complications. Yet, an inner voice tells you, now look out, here is something not quite all right, you know.
Yes.
You cannot tell why and how, but we have a lot of subliminal perceptions, you know, sense perceptions. And from those, we probably draw a good deal of our intuitions. But that is perception by the way of the unconscious.
Yeah.
And you can observe that with intuitive types. You see, intuitive types very often do not perceive by their eyes or by their ears. They perceive by intuition. For instance, once it happened that I had a woman patient in the morning at 9 o'clock. And you see, I often smoke my pipe, and there's a certain smell of tobacco in the room, or a cigar. And so she came and said, but you begin early. I said, you call it early at 9 o'clock? She said, no, you must have seen somebody at 8 o'clock. I said, how do you know? There had been a man there that had come at 8 o'clock already. Then she said, oh, well, I just a hunch. There must have been a gentleman with you this morning. I said, but how do you know it was a gentleman? He said, oh, well, I just had the impression, the atmosphere was just like a gentleman here.
Yeah.
All the time, you know, the ashtray was under her nose, and there was a half-smoked cigar.
Yes.
But she wouldn't notice it.
Yeah.
So you see, the intuitive is the type that doesn't see the stumbling block before his feet, but he's rat for 10 miles.
Yes. Do you make a distinction between an intuitive extrovert and an intuitive introvert?
Yes. All these types can be on the extrovert or introverted line.
For example, more specifically, what would be an example or a difference between an intuitive extrovert and an intuitive introvert?
Well, you know, you have chosen a somewhat difficult case, you know, because one of the most difficult types is the intuitive introvert, you know. The intuitive extrovert you find among hunters, bankers, gamblers. That is quite understandable. But the introvert the introverted variety is more difficult because he has intuitions as to the subjective factor, namely the inner world.
Yes.
And of course that is now very difficult to understand because what he sees are most uncommon things, and he doesn't like to talk of them if he's not a fool, because he would spoil his own game by telling what he sees, because people won't understand it.
Yes.
For instance, once I had a patient, a young woman, about 27 or 8, and her first words were, when I had seated her, she said, you know, doctor, I come to you because I have a snake in my abdomen. I said, what? She said, yes, a snake, a black snake, coiled up right in the bottom of my abdomen. And I must have made a rather bewildered face at her. And she said, you know, I don't mean it literally, but I should say it was a snake. It was a snake. You see? Now, you see, our further conversation a little later was that she said, that was about in the middle of our treatment that only lasted for 10 consultations. She had foretold me, I come 10 times and then it's all right. I said, how do you know? Oh, I got a hunch, you see.
Yeah.
And really, about the 5th or 6th hour, she said, Doctor, I must tell you, the snake has risen. It is now about here. Hunch. And then, on the 10th day, I said, now, this is our last hour. And do you feel cured? And she said, beaming, she said, you know, this morning, it came up and came out of my mouth, and the head was golden. And those were her last words. Now, you see, that same girl, when it comes to reality, she came to me because she couldn't hear the step of her feet anymore.
Yes.
Because she walked on air.
Yes.
Literally.
Yes.
She couldn't hear it, and that frightened her. And when she came to me, I asked her for her address. And then she said, oh, pension so-and-so. Well, it is not just called pension, but it is a sort of pension. And it is, I never had heard of it.
Yes.
And I said, no, I'm curious, I never have heard of that place. Well, it's a very nice place, he said. You're curious enough, there are only young girls there, very nice and very lively young girls. And they have a merry time. I often wish they would invite me to their merry evenings. And I said, but they amuse themselves all alone. Said, oh no, there are plenty of young gentlemen coming in, and they have a beautiful time, but they never invite me. It turned out that it was a private brother.
Yes.
And she was a perfectly decent girl, you know, of a very good family, not from here. She had found that place, I don't know how. And she was utterly unaware that those were all prostitutes. I said, for heaven's sake, you fell into a very dark place. You hastened to get out of it. You see, that was her sensation.
Yeah.
You see, she didn't see reality.
Yeah.
But she had hunches like anything, and they came off.
Yeah.
Now, you see, such a person cannot possibly speak of her experiences.
Yes.
Because everybody would think she's absolutely crazy.
Yes.
I myself was quite shocked when I thought, for heaven's sake, is that case a schizophrenia?
Yes. Yes.
Because you don't hear that kind of speech.
Right.
But she assumed that the old man, of course, knows everything, and he even doesn't understands such kind of language.
Yeah.
So you see, if when the intuitive, the introverted intuitive would speak what he really perceives, then practically nobody would understand it. He would be misunderstood. And so they learn to keep things to themselves, and you hardly ever hear them talking of these things. That is a great disadvantage, but it is an enormous advantage in another way. Not to speak of the experience they gather in that respect, but also in human relations. For instance, they come into the presence of somebody they don't know, and suddenly they have inner images. And those inner images give them a more or less complete information about the psychology of the partner.
Yeah.
You know, that is, but the case can also happen that they come into the presence of somebody who they don't know at all, not from Adam, and they know an important piece out of the biography of that person.
Yes, yes.
And are not aware of it, and tell the story.
Yes.
And then the cat is in the fire.
Yes, that's right.
You see, so the introverted intuitive has in a way a very difficult life, although one of the most interesting lives.
Yes.
But it is difficult often to get into their confidence,
yes,
you know.
Yes, because as you say, they're afraid that people will think they're sick.
The things that are interesting to them or are vital to them are utterly strange to the ordinary individual.
Yes.
The psychologists should know of such things, you see.
Yes.
You see, when people make psychology, as a psychologist ought to do, well, the very first question, is he extroverted or is he introverted?
Yes.
He will look at entirely different things.
Yes.
Is he a sensation type? Is he an intuitive type? Is he thinking? Is he feeling?
Yes.
That, because you see, these things are complicated, that they are still more complicated, because the introverted thinker, for instance, is compensated by extroverted feeling.
Yes.
Or by inferior extroverted, archaic extroverted feeling.
Yes.
So an introverted thinker may be very crude in his feeling life. For instance, the introverted philosopher that is always carefully avoiding women will be married by his cook in the end.
Yes. Now, then, in other words, then we can take your introverted, extrovert categories and, in a sense, go through describing a sensation introvert type, sensation extrovert type, thinking introvert type, thinking extrovert type, and so on. In each case, it stems from really not real categories, but simply, as you say, an approach, something to sort of help us study, a model.
Well, it is just a sort of a skeleton. To which you have to add the flesh, or say it is a country mapped out, you know, by triangulation points, and that doesn't mean the country consists of triangulation points.
Yeah.
That is only in order to have an idea of the distances.
Yes.
And so it is a means to an end. It only makes sense, such a scheme, when you deal with practical cases.
Of course, you're familiar with the work of Dr. J.B. Ryan at Duke University.
Yes.
And of course, some of his work in extrasensory perception and clairvoyance, as he calls it, mental telepathy, you know, and so on and so forth. Some of the descriptions in his work sound quite a bit at times like intuitive function operating. And in terms of your knowledge of this work, would you say that a person who has clairvoyance, in a sense, would then be an intuitive type? A person who, in his experiment, is more likely to...
That's quite probable. Or it can be a sensation type, say an extroverted sensation type that is very much influenced by the unconscious.
I see.
Because he has introverted intuition in his unconscious.
I see.
You see, there are two groups, you see, the rational group and the irrational group. The rational group is thinking and feeling, because the ideal thinking is a rational result.
That's right.
Feeling also a rational result, rational values.
Yes.
That is differentiated feeling. Whereas sensation must needs be irrational, because it may not prejudice facts.
Yeah.
You see,
Yeah.
it shall not prejudice facts. The real ideal perception is that you have an accurate perception of the things as they are, without addition or corrections.
Yeah.
On the other side, the intuition does not look at the things as they are. That is prison, that is anathema to the intuition.
Yes.
It looks, ever so shortly at the things as they are, and makes off into an unconscious process, at the end of which we have seen something nobody else would have seen.
Yes.
You see. Now, so you see these people who yield the best results are always those people where introverted or introverted intuition comes in.
Yes.
But you see, that is a side aspect of it. It's not interesting.
Yes.
There the question is another question far more interesting, namely that the terms they use, Rhein himself uses them,
yes.
recognition,
telepathy, yes.
etc. They mean nothing at all.
Yes.
They're words, but he thinks he has said something when he says telepathy.
Yes.
That's nothing.
In other words, the word itself is not a description of the process. That's what you're saying. Yes.
It means nothing. It means nothing at all.
Yes. Now, of course, a lot of the things that you're describing, I think often scientists will say, well, this is due to chance occurrences, chance factors. And Ryan, in his own work, used statistical methods. We find this happening more often than would be expected by chance.
Well, you see, he proves that it is more than chance.
Yes.
It is statistically graspable.
Yes.
And that is the important point.
Yes.
And that hasn't been contradicted.
Yes.
You see, there was such a poor sap who, that happened in England. That man said, "Oh, Rhein, oh, that's nothing but guesswork." Exactly.
Yes.
That is it. It is guessing.
Yes.
What you call guessing, a hunch is guessing.
Yes.
A bit of definite guess. A definite guess, you know, is a hunch, you know.
Yes.
Just that.
Yes.
But that means nothing.
Yes.
You see, the point is that it is more than merely probable.
Yes.
It is not. It is beyond chance.
Yes.
And that is the great problem. But you know, people hate such problems. They can't deal with.
Yes. They're not concrete. They're not in front of them.
They can't deal with it.
Yes.
Even Rhein doesn't understand my argument in that respect, because it is a relativation. Now I'm going to say something which in these sacred rooms is anathema. a relativation of time and space through the psyche. And that's the fact. And that is what Rhein has made evident.
Yeah.
Now swallow that.
Well,
that's difficult.
Yes. Well, may I go a little further and for some of your recent work, which is indeed very profound, and it is not too well known to many of our students as yet.
Of course not.
And of course this
Nobody reads these things. Only the general public.
And
because my books are at least sold.
I'm referring now to the concept of synchronicity, which you have discussed, and which would have some relevance at this point in our discussion. Would you care to comment a little bit on this concept?
That is awfully complicated. One wouldn't know where to begin. Of course, it is this kind of thinking has been started long ago, and when Rhein brought out these results, I thought now we have at least a more or less dependable basis to argue on, you know. But the argument was not understood at all, because it's really very, very difficult. You know, there are plenty of facts in the observation of the unconscious where you come across cases of a very peculiar kind of parallel events, namely that, say, I have a certain thought or a certain definite subject is occupying my attention,
yes.
my interest. At the same time, something else, quite independently, happens that portrays just that thought.
Yes.
Now, this is utter nonsense, you know, looked at from a causal point of view. That it is not nonsense is made evident by the results of Ryan's experiments. There is a probability, it is something more than chance, that such a case occurs. Now I never made statistical experiments to except one in the way of Ryan. I have made one for another purpose. But I have come across quite a number of cases where it was most astounding to find that two causal chains happened at the same time, but independent upon each other, so that you could say they have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
Of course, it's quite clear. For instance, just so I speak of a red car, and at that moment a red car comes here, you see.
Yes.
Now, I hadn't seen it. It was impossible because it was behind the building. In this moment, the red car appears. Now, this is, one says, oh, that's mere chance. Ryan's experiment proves that these cases are not mere chances. Of course, many of these things are occurrences where we cannot apply such an argument, otherwise we would be superstitious. We can't say, now this car has appeared because here was some remarks have been made about the red car.
Yes. It's not cause and effect.
Oh, this is a miracle that the red car appears. It is not, it is chance, just chance. But these chances happen more often than chance allows.
Yes.
And that shows that there is something behind it.
Yes.
So you see, Ryan has a whole institute and with many co-workers.
Yes.
And has the means. We have no means here, you know, and I had no means to make such experiments. Otherwise, I probably would have done them. But this just was physically impossible. So I had to content myself with the observation of facts. I began an examination of the human attitudes, namely how our consciousness functions. I couldn't help seeing, for instance, the difference between Freud and Adler. Typical difference. The one assumes that the things evolve along the line of the sex instinct. The other assumes that things evolve along the line of power drive. And there I was in between the two, but I could see the justification of Freud's view. I could also see the same for Adler. And I knew that there are plenty of other ways in which things could be envisaged. And so I considered my scientific duty to examine first the condition of the human consciousness that is the originator of ways of envisaging. It is the factor that produces attitudes, conscious attitudes towards certain phenomena. So when you know, for instance, that there are people who see the difference between red and green, you can take it for a fact that everybody sees that difference. Not at all. There are cases of daltonism and so on, you know. The one sees this, the other sees that, and I tried to find out what the principal differences were. And that is the book about the types. And so first is introverted and extroverted attitude, then the functional aspects,
namely which of the four functions is predominant. Now mind you, these four functions were not a scheme I had invented and applied to psychology. On the contrary, it took me quite a long time to discover that there is another type, but this thinking type. This I thought my type is of course that is human. It is not. There are other people who decide the same problems I had to decide in an entirely different way. They look at things in an entirely different way. They have entirely different values. They are, for instance, feeling types. And so, after a while, I discovered that there are intuitive types. They gave me much trouble. It took me over a year to become somewhat clear about the existence of intuitive types. And the last and the most unexpected was the sensation type. And only later on I saw that those are naturally the four aspects of conscious orientation. You can increase the number of principles, but I found the most simple way is the way I told you.
Yes.
As the division by 4 is a simple and natural division of a circle. I didn't know the symbolism of this particular classification. Only when I studied the archetypes, I became aware that this is a very important archetype
yes.
that has played an enormous role. I also found in the study of the types that it gives us a certain lead as to the personal nature of the unconscious, the personal quality of the unconscious in a given case. But to take an extrovert, well, his unconscious has then an introverted quality, because all the extroverted qualities are played in consciousness, and the introversion is left to the unconscious, therefore it has introverted qualities, and so on with the functions the same.
Yes.
That gave me a lead of the diagnostic value. It helped me to understand my patients.
Well, Professor Jung, we have been discussing many of the very fundamental ideas in your theories, such as anima and animus, and of course being representative of the whole idea of archetypes, as you explained it so interestingly. And we talked a little bit about this whole conception of the ego and the self and the persona as they are involved in all of this. And as we speak, of course, it begins to point to the direction of the sort of question that is so important as we try to understand the individual. And this centers around the problem of motivation, why the person does what he does. Now, to a great degree, you've already talked about this when you talked about archetypes and this whole matter. Now, in the work of Dr. Freud, he spoke of libido as an energy, and earlier we spoke of libido and the fact that you felt that it was more than just sexual energy. You thought it to be something much broader. Now, you have certain principles about psychic energy which are indeed very provocative. Now, one of this principle is, I believe you referred to as the principle of entropy. Entropy.
Well, you know, only I allude to it.
Yes, yes.
The main point is, you know, the standpoint of energetics as applied to psychical phenomena. There you have no possibility to measure exactly. So it always remains a sort of an analogy. As Freud, for instance, uses the term libido in the sense of a sexual energy.
Yes.
And now that is not quite correct. You see, if it is sexual, then it is a power, like electricity, or any other form of manifestation of energy.
Yes.
Now,
energy is a concept.
Yes.
Energy is a concept by which you try to express the analogies of all power manifestations.
I see.
Namely that they have a certain quantity, a certain intensity, and that there is a flow in one direction, namely to the ultimate suspension of the opposites. For instance,
I see.
Height, a lake on a mountain,
Yeah.
flows down until all the water is down, you know, and then it is finished.
Yes.
And so, you see, something similar is the case in psychology, that you see it from the fact that we get tired from intellectual work,
Yes.
or from consciously living, and then we must sleep in order to restore our powers. And it's just, I said in the night, as if the water was pumped from the lower level to a higher level, you know, so that he can work again the next day.
Yes.
Of course, that simile is limping too.
Yes.
So it is only in an analogous way that we use the term energy.
Yes.
And I used it because I wanted to express the fact that the power manifestation of sexuality is not the only power manifestation, because you have another drive, say the drive to conquer, or to drive to aggression, or something of the sort.
Yes.
Or there are many forms, you see. For instance, to take animals, the way they are building their nest, the urge of the traveling bird, you know, that migrates. Now, all they are driven by a sort of energy manifestation.
I see.
And you see, the meaning of the word sexuality would be entirely gone if everything is that. So Freud himself saw that this is not applicable everywhere, and later on he corrected himself by assuming that there are also ego drives.
Ego drive, yes.
You see, now that is something else.
Yes.
That's another manifestation. Now, in order not to presume or to prejudice things, I speak simply of energy. An energy. It is a quantity of energy that can manifest via sexuality or via any other instinct.
Any other type of drive, yes. Yes.
And that is the main feature, not the existence of one single power.
I see.
Because that is not warrantable.
Yes. Now, another thing about motivation, or the condition which arouse and direct and sustain the individual, there seems to be two views that we find in much of our psychology in America today. Now, one is might be called an historical view, where we try to look in the history and development of the individual for answers to why he is doing certain things at the moment.
Yes.
Then we have another view, which was postulated and discussed by Dr. Kurt Lewin, Dr. Kurt Lewin, which is sort of a field theory. He thinks that the history, the past, is not important motivation, but all conditions which affect the individual at that moment. We can predict behavior by knowing all the conditions of that moment, but we don't have to go back to the past to understand why the person does what he does. Now, would you think that this present field idea of Dr. Lewin has any virtue? Does it make sense?
Obviously, you see, I always insist that even chronic neurosis has its true cause in the moment.
In the moment. Now.
The neurosis is made every day by the wrong attitude the individual has. But that wrong attitude is a historical fact. That means to be explained historically by things that have happened in the past.
Yes.
But that is one-sided too, because the all psychological facts are oriented not only to a cause but also to
a certain goal.
Goal, yes.
You see, they are in a way teleological.
Yes.
Namely, they serve a certain purpose.
Yes.
And so, a wrong attitude can have originated in a certain way long ago.
Yes.
But it wouldn't exist today anymore if there were not immediate causes and immediate purposes that keep it alive today.
Yes. Yes, I see.
So a neurosis can be finished suddenly on a certain day, despite of all causes.
Yes.
One has observed in the beginning of the war, the cases of compulsion neurosis that have lasted for many years,
yes,
suddenly were cured.
Yes. Yes.
Because they got into an entirely new condition. It is like a shock. You see that with shock. Even the schizophrenia can be vastly improved by a shock.
Yes. Yes.
Because that's a new condition. It is a very shocking thing that shocks them out of their habitual attitude, and then they are no more in it, and then the whole thing collapses, the whole system that has been built up for years.
Yes. So in therapy, in working with a patient, you would not say that it's absolutely imperative to have to more or less reformulate all of his past life in order to help him with his present neurosis. You feel that you could deal with him at the moment with his problem as it is at this time. It is not necessary to go back and probe into things that happened to him during his first, second, and third year of life.
You see, there is no system about it in therapy.
Yes.
In therapy, you treat the patient as he is in the present moment, irrespective of causes and such things. That is all more or less theoretical.
Yes.
There are cases who know just as much about their own neurosis as I know about it, in a way.
Yes.
In such cases, I can start right away with posing the problem. For instance, there is a case, a professor of philosophy, and he imagines that he has cancer.
Yes.
He shows me several dozen X-ray plates that prove that there is no cancer.
Yes.
And he says, of course I have no cancer, but nevertheless I'm afraid I could have one. You see, I have consulted so many surgeons, and they all assure me there is none, and I know there is none, but I might have one, you see, and that's enough.
Yeah.
Now, you see, such a case can stop from one moment to the other.
Yeah.
He simply stops thinking such a foolish thing.
I see. I see.
But that is exactly what he cannot do.
Yes.
And in such a case, I say, well, it's perfectly plain to you. It's nonsense what you believe. Now, why are you forced to believe such nonsense? What is the power that makes you think such a thing against your free will? You know it is nonsense, and why should you think it? Or what for should you think it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and what is that power that makes you think such a thing? It's like a possession, you know.
Yes.
Exactly. It's
Yes.
like a demon
Yes.
in him
Yes.
that makes him think like that,
Yes.
in spite of the fact that he doesn't want it.
Yes.
You see, then we have the problem. That is the problem for an intellectual man. And then I say, now, you see, you don't know, you have no answer.
Yes.
I have no answer.
Yes.
Now what are we going to do?
Yes.
I say, now we must see what you dream. Because the dream is a manifestation of the unconscious side. Now he never has heard of the unconscious side. So I must explain to him that he has an unconscious, and that the dream is a manifestation of it, and if we succeed in analyzing the dream, we might get an idea about that power that makes him think like that.
I see. I see.
You see? In such a case, one can begin right away with the analysis of dreams.
Yeah.
And in all cases that are a bit serious, mind you, this is not a simple case, this is a very serious and difficult case, in spite of the simplicity of the phenomenology, of the symptomatology.
Yes.
In all cases, after the preliminaries, as it were, history of the family, the medical anamnesis, etc. We come to that question. What is it in your unconscious that makes you wrong?
Yes.
That hinders you to think normally?
Yes.
And then we are there where we can begin with the observation of the unconscious. And then, day by day, one goes on by the data the unconscious produces.
Yes.
You see, we discuss the dream, and that gives a new surface to the whole problem. And he will have another dream, and the next dream gives again an answer, because the unconscious is in a compensated relation to consciousness. And after a while, we get the full picture.
Yes.
And if he has a full picture and has the necessary moral stamina, well, then he can be cured.
I see.
But in the end, it is a moral question whether a man applies what he had learned or not.
Yes. So you see then, in a sense, in this situation, the unconscious plays a very important part. The unconscious which is found in the dream. But as you see it then, what you have found in this dream is not necessarily then a image or symbol of what has happened in the past in his particular life. Not at all.
It is just the symbol of the symbol is not, you see, that is a special term. It is the manifestation of the situation of the unconscious, looked at from the unconscious.
I see.
You see, I tell you, for instance, something which is my personal or subjective view.
Yes.
And if I ask myself, now, are you really quite convinced of it? Well, I must admit I have certain doubts.
Yes.
There are certain doubts. Not in the moment when I tell you, but these doubts are in the unconscious. And when I have a dream about it, these doubts come to the foreground in my dreams.
Yes.
And that is the way the unconscious looks at the thing.
Yes, yes.
It is just so as if the unconscious will say, oh yes, that's all very well what you are stating, but you omit entirely such and such a point.
Yes, yes. Now, as the unconscious acts on this present situation, now looking at this thing in motivational, broad motivational terms, now this effect of the unconscious is not something which is the result of repression in the same way the orthodox psychoanalyst looks at it all, then, as you say.
No, it may be, you know, that what the unconscious has to say is so disagreeable that one prefers not to listen.
Yes.
And in most cases, people would be probably less neurotic if they could admit the things, because these things are always a bit difficult or disagreeable or inconvenient or something of the sort. So there is always a certain amount of repression, but that is not the main thing.
Not
the main thing is that they are really unconscious.
Yes.
And you see, if you are unconscious about certain things that ought to be conscious, then you are dissociated.
I see.
And then you are a man whose left hand never knows what the right is doing, and counteracts or interferes with the right hand.
Yes.
Now such a man is hampered all over the place.
Yes, yes. Now, looking at the unconscious in this way, of course this is, as you say, it's unconscious, how can we know about it?
Yeah.
But trying to, just for that moment, just as an illustration, would a particular individual, we might say, who has been brought up in a culture such as the culture of India, a particular individual in India, as we were to, if we could examine his unconscious, would it be, in many respects, say, similar to the unconscious of a particular individual who was, say, lived in Switzerland all of his life? In other words, you spoke earlier about these universals.
Yes.
Would there be a great deal of equivalence between the unconscious of a particular individual who has been raised in one culture and another individual who was raised in an entirely different culture?
Yes. Well, you see, that question is also complicated, because when we speak of the unconscious, we almost should say, which unconscious? Namely, is it that personal unconsciousness which is characteristic for a certain person, for a certain individual?
Yes, so that you have the personal unconscious. This is one unconscious.
Yes, that is the personal unconscious.
And you call it the personal.
And in treatment, for instance, in the treatment of neurosis, you have to do with that personal unconscious for quite a while. And then only dreams come that show that the collective unconscious is touched upon. Now, as long as there is material for personal nature,
Yes.
you have to deal with the personal unconscious.
Yes.
But when you get to, say, to a question, to a problem, which is no more merely personal, but also collective, you get collective dreams.
Yes. Now, the distinction then between the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious then is that the personal is could be more involved with the immediate life of the individual,
Oh, yes.
and the collective would be universal, would
Yes.
be the same,
More-
have elements of all men.
It will be collective.
Collective in this sense.
For instance, you know, every society has collective problems,
Yes.
collective convictions, and so on.
Yes.
Now, we are very much influenced by them.
Yes.
For instance, you belong to a certain political party or
Yes.
to a certain confession.
Yes.
And that can be a serious determinant of your behavior.
Yes.
Now, as long as your personal conflict doesn't touch upon it, it's no question, it doesn't appear. But the moment
Yes.
you transcend your personal sphere and come to your unpersonal determinants, say to the question, a political question,
Yes.
or any other social question, which really matters to you,
Yes.
then you are confronted with a collective problem, and then you have collective dreams.
Yes. I wonder if it would be too presumptuous of me to ask if you could, for the moment, think of an actual case of perhaps a patient or a friend in which you might show us rather specifically how the personal and the collective unconscious were acting in, say, his neurosis or perhaps in a problem that he may have had
Well,
at the
you
moment.
see, there is an enormous amount of personal dreams, for instance, and I couldn't possibly tell you just a moment,
Yes.
simply for embarras de richesse.
Yes.
There are millions of such personal dreams that simply deal, for instance, with the fact how your relation is to your father or to your mother or to your wife or
Yes.
and so on, with all sorts of individual variations.
Yes.
Now, but suppose a patient comes to that level, or that his conflict begins to become really very serious, so that his mind might suffer.
Yes.
Then he can have a collective dream,
Yes.
in which clearly mythological motives appear.
I see.
There are plenty of examples in literature.
All right.
The book, you know, an introduction to the psychology of the unconscious.
Yeah.
There are such dreams.
Yes.
And that can be. I remember, for instance, a case. Was a very learned man and very rational.
Yes.
And he had, of course, a lot of personal problems, and but they got so bad that he got into very disagreeable relations to his whole surroundings.
Yes.
He was, for instance, a member of a society, and he got into a brawl with the people of that society, you know.
Yes.
And it was very quite shocking.
Yes.
Now, he started with collective dreams.
Yes.
Suddenly he dreamt of things he had never thought of in his life before.
Yes.
Mythological motives, and he thought he was crazy.
Yes.
Because he couldn't understand it at all. Just as if the whole world was transformed. Now that is what you see in cases of schizophrenia.
Yeah.
In that case, it was not a case of schizophrenia. As examples, you can take any of these collective dreams I published.
Yes.
There are plenty. For the moment, I cannot remember a suitable example. You know, to make it clear I should tell a long story.
All right.
And then you see where it applies, otherwise it makes no sense, and then something short. Well, I told you that case of that intuitive girl.
Yes, yes.
Who suddenly came out with the statement that she had a black snake in the belly.
Yes, yes.
Well, now, that is a collective symbol.
Yes.
That
yes.
is not an individual fantasy. That is a collective fantasy.
A collective, yes.
That is well known in India.
Yes.
Well, she has nothing to do with India, but we have it too, because it was generally human.
Yes.
But it's entirely unknown. So that I, even in the first moment, thought, perhaps she's crazy.
Yes.
But she wasn't only highly intuitive.
Yes.
It is in India known. It is the basis of a whole philosophical system of Tantrism.
Yes.
This is Kundalini. Kundalini serpent.
I see.
You see? And that is something known to some few specialists.
Yes.
Generally, it's not known that we have a serpent in the abdomen.
Yes. Yes.
But that is a collective, you see, that is a collective dream or a collective fantasy.
Yes. Now, in day-to-day living, the individual, is it possible that things that trouble him and cause tension, that he represses? Now, these things that he represses will become part of the personal unconscious.
Yes,
part of the personal unconscious.
Yes, you see,
Yes.
He doesn't repress consciously always.
Yes.
These things disappear simply. Disappear, and Freud explains that by an act of repression.
Yes.
But you can prove that these things never have been conscious before.
Yes. Yes.
They simply don't appear.
I see.
And you don't know why they don't appear. Of course, après le coup, you can say, when it comes up, you can say, that is why they didn't appear, because they were disagreeable or incompatible with his conscious views, with his conscious attitude.
I see.
But that is afterwards. You couldn't predict it.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So you see, these things that have an emotional tone,
Yes.
they are partially autonomous.
Yes.
So that they can appear, or the contrary, they do not appear.
Yes.
They can disappear at wish, not of the subject, but of their own.
Yes.
Or you also can repress them.
Yes.
But it is so the same with projections. For instance, people say, one makes projections.
Yes.
It's nonsense. One doesn't make them, one finds them.
Yes.
That are already there, because the unconscious is here not conscious, but there it is conscious.
Yes.
In my brother.
Yes.
I see the beam of my eye as a splinter in my brother's eye.
I see.
You see?
I see.
And that is right there, because I am unconscious of the beam in my eye.
I see.
You see, the projections are not made, and so these disappearances or these so-called repressions are just like projections. They, instead of being projected into somebody or into something outside, they are introjected. They are already unconscious.
Already unconscious. I see.
But you are not the one that is doing it.
I see.
There are cases, sure, but I should say the majority of cases are no repressions.
Yes.
That was my first point of litigation with Freud.
Yes. Yes.
I saw in the association experiment that certain complexes are quite certainly not repressed. They simply won't appear.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Because you see, the unconscious is real.
Yes.
It is an entity. It works by itself. It is autonomous.
Yes, I see. So, in a sense, when looking at the so-called defense mechanisms that the orthodox psychoanalysts speak of, like projection, rationalization, and so on and so forth, then, in a sense, where you would differ from the orthodox psychoanalytic view, you would not say then that they are a repressed type of way of defending a manner in which the ego is being defended, but rather you would say that they were already there. Yes. They're simply manifestations of patterns that are already present in the unconscious.
Yes, for instance, take that example of that serpent. That never has been repressed, you know, otherwise it should have been conscious to her. It was exactly unconscious to her,
yes.
And it only appeared in her fantasy.
Yes, yes, I see.
It appeared spontaneously.
Yes.
She didn't know how she came to it.
Yes.
She said, well, I just saw it.
Yes. Now, some of the orthodox psychoanalysts might have said that this was a phallic symbol.
Oh, yes,
yes.
Of course, but you can't say anything.
Yes.
You know, you can say a church spire is a phallic symbol.
Yes.
But when you dream of a penis, what is that?
Yes.
You know what an analyst said?
Yes.
One of the orthodox,
yes.
the old guard.
Yes.
He said, in this case the sensor has not functioned.
Yes. Yes.
Now, you call that a scientific explanation.
Well, Professor Jung, in our several interesting discussions so far, a great deal of our talk has been some of the very fundamental aspects of your theories and writing, and of course, the purpose in getting some of your reactions to these fundamental ideas was so that our students, many of whom have not had an opportunity to study a great deal of your work, might sort of be introduced to some of your ideas from you personally, which of course is probably the best way they possibly could be. Now, first, as one looks over your work, one is impressed with a much broader scope, of course, and just the beginning fundamental outline of a theory of personality.
Well, of course, when you study human psychology, you can't help noticing that man's psychology doesn't only consist of the ramifications of instinct in his behavior. Instincts are not the only determinants. There are many others, and the study of man from his biological aspect only is by far insufficient to understand human psychology. It is absolutely necessary that you study man also in his social and general environments.
Yes.
And so you have to consider, for instance, the fact that there are different kinds of society, different kinds of nations, different traditions, and to that purpose it is absolutely necessary that one treats the problem of the human psyche from many standpoints, and each is a most considerable task, naturally. Thus, when I, after my association experiments, when I realized that there is obviously an unconscious, the question arose, now what is this unconscious? Does it consist merely of rests, of remnants of conscious activities, or are there things that are practically forever unconscious? In other words, is the unconscious factor in itself? And I soon came to the conclusion that the unconscious must be a factor in itself, because I observed time and again that, for instance, people's dreams or schizophrenic patients' delusions and fantasies contain the motives which they couldn't possibly have acquired in our surroundings. This depends upon the fact that the child is not born tabula rasa, but it is a definite mixture of or combination of genes, and the gene, although the genes seem to contain chiefly dynamic factors, arrangeurs of a certain behavior, they have a tremendous importance also for the arrangement of the psyche. The psyche too, inasmuch as it appears naturally. Before it appears you cannot study it, but as much as it appears, it has certain qualities, it has a certain character, and that needs must depend upon the elements born in the child. So factors determining human behavior are born with the child and determine its further development. Now that is one side of the picture. The other side of the picture is the individual lives in connection with others in certain definite surroundings that will influence the given combination of qualities. And that is now also a very complicated factor, because the environmental influences are not merely personal. There are any amount of objective factors, the general social conditions, laws, convictions, ways of looking at things, of dealing with things. Now, these things are not of an arbitrary character. They are historical. There are historical reasons why things are as they are. And as there are historical reasons for the qualities of the psyche that is born, there is such a thing as the history of man's evolution in the past eons. And that shows that a real understanding of the psyche must consist in the elucidation of the history of the human race, history of the mind, for instance, as of the biological, exactly as the biological data. So when I wrote my first book concerning the psychology of the unconscious, I already had formed a certain idea of the nature of the unconscious. To me it was then a living remnant of the original history of man, living in his surroundings. A very complicated picture. And my material then, my empirical material, was formed chiefly by lunatics, by cases of schizophrenia. And there I had observed that there are, chiefly in the beginning of a disease, invasions of fantasies into conscious life, fantasies of an entirely unexpected sort, most bewildering to the patient. He gets quite confused by these ideas, and he gets into a sort of panic, because he never before has thought such things, that they are quite strange to him, and equally strange to his physician. You see, the alien is equally dumbfounded by the peculiar character of those fantasies. And therefore one says that man is crazy, crazy to think such things. Nobody thinks such things. And the patient agrees in a way with him. If he would at least agree, or he does even agree. and all the more he gets into a panic. So, as an alienist, I thought it to be really the task for psychiatry to elucidate that thing that broke into consciousness, these voices, these delusions, and in those days, that is, mind you, more than 40 years ago, or almost 50 years ago, I had no hope to be able to treat these cases or to be able to help them, but I had a very great scientific curiosity, and I wanted to know what these things really were, because I thought that these things had a system. They were not merely chaotic, decayed material, because there was too much sense in those fantasies. So what I did then was I studied cases of psychogenic diseases like hysteria, hysteric somnambulism and such things, where the content that came from the unconscious were in a readable condition, in an understandable condition. And then I saw that, in contradistinction to the schizophrenics, the mental contents of hysterics were of a humanly understandable character. They were even elaborate, dramatic, suggestive, insinuating, so one could make out a second personality. Now this is not the case in schizophrenia. There the fantasies, on the contrary, are unsystematic, chaotic, and you cannot make out a proper second personality, apart from rare cases of a complicated nature. Now, I knew of psychopathic cases, just in the balance between schizophrenia and hysteria, where ideas came up, delusions that were not exactly hysterical, because they were singularly difficult to understand. It was sort of strange eruptions, and I thought that these cases could give me a better understanding. So I took the opportunity when Professor Jung, the old professor of psychology and philosophy at the University of Geneva, when he published a case of an American girl who had bestowed upon him a series of half-poetic and romantic fantasies. He published that material without commenting on them. He gave it as an example of creative imagination. Now, when I read those fantasies, I saw this is exactly the material, and I was always a bit afraid when that people, when I tell of my personal experiences with patients, that they would say, "Oh, this is all merely suggestion, you know."
Yes.
I took that case because I surely had no hand in it. It was old Professor Jung, an authority. He was a friend of William James. I knew him personally, a very fine old man, and he certainly wouldn't be accused of having influenced the patient. Yes. And that is the reason why I analyzed these fantasies, and that that case became the object of a whole book called The Psychology of the Unconscious. It is called now Symbolisms of Transformation. Yes. And I have revised it after 40 years. It needed it. because it was in the first attempt.
Yes.
And there I tried to show that there is a sort of unconscious, I then simply called it the unconscious, that clearly produces things which are historical and not personal.
Yes.
It was mythological material of the nature of which wasn't understood, neither by Professor Flournoy nor by the patient. And there I tried for the first time to produce a picture of the functioning of the unconscious, a functioning which allowed certain conclusions as to the nature of the unconscious. Then, after I had written that book, that cost me my friendship with Freud because he couldn't accept it.
Yes.
To him, the unconscious was a product of consciousness,
yes.
And it simply contained the remnants. I mean, it was a sort of storeroom where all the discarded things of consciousness were heaped up and left. But to me, the unconscious then was already a matrix, a sort of basis of consciousness of a creative nature, namely capable of autonomous acts,
yes.
Autonomous intrusions into
yes.
consciousness.
Yes.
In other words, I took the existence of the unconscious for a real fact, or for a real autonomous factor capable of independent action.
Yes.
And now that was a problem, a psychological problem of the very first order. And that made me think, and furiously, because the whole of philosophy of our days has not yet recognized this fact, that we have a counter-actor in our unconscious, that in our psyche there are two. Consciousness is one factor, and there is another factor, equally important, that is the unconscious, that can interfere with consciousness anytime it pleases. And of course I say to myself now, this is very uncomfortable, because I think I am the only master in my house, but I must admit that there is another somebody in that house that can play tricks. And I had to deal with the unfortunate victims of that interference every day in my patients. So the next thing I wrote was in 1918, namely a disquisition about the relations between the ego and the unconscious, where I tried to formulate the experiences that are more or less regularly observable in cases where a consciousness is exposed to unconscious data, or interferences or intrusions, where the unconscious is considered as an autonomous factor that has to be taken seriously, where one doesn't say anymore or undervalue the unconscious by assuming it is nothing but a discarded remnant of consciousness. It is a factor in its own dignity, and a very important factor, because it can create the most horrible disturbances. Now, when that was a pamphlet I wrote, it was published in French, and nobody understood it. I saw that the reason why nobody understands it is that while nobody has a similar experience, because the question hasn't been pursued to such an end, namely that one has taken the unconscious seriously and considered it as a real factor that can determine human behavior to a very considerable degree.
Of course, you brought up many very interesting and provocative ideas here, as you have, of course, in your many thousands of pages of writing and written work. And, of course, running through all your work, there are many of these ideas in the personal unconscious, the race unconscious, the self, the ego, the persona, the energy principles, such as we mentioned entropy and equivalence and so on, in a sense, the first and second law of thermodynamics, I believe, that you suggest or allude to. And now, in trying to look at the whole person, of course, one is struck that you are trying hard to look at the whole person, that you don't want to look at these little parts of this person, but feel there's sort of a total future realization of the whole that may be very important. That you talk, for example, about a process of individuation, how this whole person emerges, if I'm not mistaken. Would you like to comment a little bit upon this process of individuation, this process, how all these factors move toward a whole, a totality?
Well, you know, that's something quite simple. Take an acorn,
yes,
put it into the ground, it grows, and it becomes an oak.
Yes.
You see, that is man.
Yes.
Man develops from an egg.
Yes.
And develops into the whole man.
Yes.
And that is the law that is in him.
Well, when you spoke with Dr. Einstein in your early discussions, you were saying earlier that he more or less tried out some of his ideas on you. Did you ever bring to him the possibility or ask his opinion about the possibility that relativity might apply to psychic function? Did you ever discuss that particular point?
Well, you see, you know how it is. That a man is so concentrated upon his own idea, and when he is a mathematician on top of everything, then you are not welcome.
Yes, that's right. What year was it that you were friends with Einstein? When?
Well, I wouldn't call myself a friend. I was simply the host.
The host. What year was it, possibly?
And I tried to listen and to understand. And so there was little chance to insert some of my own ideas.
Yes. Was this after he'd already formulated the relativity theory, or just before?
It was just when he worked on it.
Just when he was working on it?
Yes.
That is very interesting.
Right in the beginning.
Yes. Yes.
It was very interesting.
Yes.
Very interesting.
In your dealings with Professor Toynbee, you know, we were discussing that you knew him, had contact with him. Have you gotten rather interested in his ideas of history?
Oh yes, you see his ideas about the life of civilizations. That is ruled by archetypal forms.
Yes.
And Toynbee has seen that what I mean by the historical function of archetypal developments.
I see.
See, that is a mighty important determinant of human behavior.
Yes.
That lasts for centuries or for thousands of years, and expresses itself in symbols.
Yes. Yes.
Sometimes symbols you would think nothing of it. For instance, you know that Russia, the Soviet republics, have that symbol of the red star.
Yes.
Now, it's a five-rayed red star.
Yes.
America has the five-rayed white star.
Yes.
They are enemies.
Yes.
And can't come together. Now, in the Middle Ages, for about at least 2,000 years, the red and the white is the couple.
I see.
That is ultimately destined to marry each other.
Yes, I see. Very, very interesting.
You see?
Very interesting, yes.
So America is a sort of matriarchy in as much as most of the money is in the hands of women.
Yeah, right.
And Russia is the land of the little father.
Yeah.
You see, that's a patriarchy.
Yes, very, very interesting.
And so it is father and mother, you know. The white woman, in Middle East they call it the white woman, the femina candida, and the servus rubeus, the red slave.
I see, yes, yes.
Now,
so it was going to happen.
Yes,
There.
the two lovers that quarrel with each other.
Yeah. I was about to ask you a little bit about what seems to be a very fundamental part of your writing and your ideas, and it's encased in the term mandala.
Yeah,
Now this seems to be sort of an ultimate realization, a direction, and I would certainly be most interested in hearing your observations on this idea.
Well, mandala is just one typical archetypal form.
Yes.
It is what they call in alchemy the quadratura circuli,
yes.
the square in the circle,
yes.
or the circle in the square.
Yes.
And it is an age-old symbol.
Yes.
That goes right back in the prehistory of man,
yes.
and is all over the earth.
Yes.
And it either expresses the deity or the self.
Yes.
And these two terms are psychologically very much related.
Yes.
Which doesn't mean that I believe that God is a self or that the self is God.
I see.
I make that statement that
yes.
there is a psychological relation.
Yes.
And that can be, have plenty of evidence for it.
Yes.
And it is a very important archetype. It's the archetype of an inner order.
I see.
And it is always used in that sense, either to make the arrangement of the many, many aspects of the universe, a world scheme, or a scheme of our psyche.
Yeah.
And it expresses the fact that there is a center and a periphery.
Yeah.
And it tries to embrace the whole. It's a symbol of wholeness.
Wholeness.
So you see, in a moment where, say, during a treatment, when there is great disorder and chaos in a man's mind,
yes.
Then this symbol can appear as in the form of a mandala in a dream, or when he makes imaginary fantastical drawings or
yes.
something of the sort. There it spontaneously appears as a compensatory archetype, bringing order, showing the possibility of order.
So it's sort of a direction, a goal.
Centeredness.
Yes.
Centeredness.
Centeredness, yes.
And it means a center which is not coincident with the ego, but with the wholeness. It is wholeness. Yes. Our wholeness, which I call the self.
Yes.
This is the term for wholeness.
Yes.
And I'm not whole in my ego. My ego is a fragment of my personality.
Total self, yes.
So you see, that the center of a mandala is not the ego, it is the whole personality.
The whole self.
The center of the whole personality.
Yes.
And it plays a very great role in the East, for instance. But in the Middle Ages equally.
Yes.
And then it has been lost, it has been thought of as a mere sort of allegorical, decorative motive. But as a matter of fact, it is highly important and highly autonomous symbol that appears in dreams and so on, or in folklore.
Yes.
This is, one could easily say, the main archetype.
Yes. Yes. Now, in speaking of this totality, which you say is sort of unified in the self, and of course as you suggested here, that the mandala is this very important archetype symbolizing this balance, I believe, as you alluded to here.
Yes.
Of course, sometimes we try in psychology to start from whatever totality does exist in the individual and try to sort of look into underlying motivation, and we have recently used a great deal of certain types of testing that we call projective tests. And as you've already suggested, and we all know, of course, very well that you certainly played a major role in developing this point of view with your word association method. And of course, to a great degree, another very interesting development, of course, in about 1922, Hermann Rorschach developed his ink blot or Rorschach test. Now, first of all, to even talk a little bit more about word association work, we talked a little bit about it already. We've heard your comments on it. Would you like to, if we could here perhaps get into it in a little bit more detail? Now, first of all, what are the ingredients of the word association test? What is involved in the use of it?
You mean the practical?
Yes, the practical use of it. Yes.
Oh well, you see, in the beginning, when I was a young man, of course, I was completely disoriented with patience. I didn't know where to begin or what to say.
Yes, yes.
And the association at Firm has given me the chance to offer access to their unconscious.
Yes.
I learned about the things that did not tell me.
Yes, yes.
And I got a deep insight into the things they did not know.
Yes.
And they discovered many things.
Now, would you say that from responses, and as you say, complexes or sort of emotional blocks?
Yes, that was the main thing.
Of course, this word complex, I know, is a word which originated. It's used very widely now. The gefühlsbetonte Komplex, that is, was my term. Yes, yes. Now, do you hope from these complexes or emotional blocks that you uncover as you administer this test to get at materials of the personal unconscious or the racial unconscious or all of the factors that influence this individual?
You know, in the beginning there was no question of a collective unconscious or something like that. It is chiefly the ordinary personal complexes that
I see. You weren't expecting to get into such depth.
Among hundreds of complex associations, there might appear an archetypal element, but that wouldn't show particularly.
Yes, yes. Now,
that is not important. You know, it is like a Rorschach, a superficial orientation.
Yes, yes. You knew Hermann Rorschach, I believe, did you not?
No, he has circumvented me as much as possible.
Yes. But did you get to know him personally? No, you did not.
I never saw him.
Yes.
No.
In his intro-tensive and extra-tensive ideas, of course, he's talking a great deal about your introversion and extroversion ideas in his own interpretation.
I was anathema because I had frustrated, you see, and that is unforgivable. I never should have done.
So you really didn't have any personal contact with Rorschach?
No personal relation at all.
No, I see. Are you familiar with his test? Have you seen his test, the Rorschach test?
Yes, I know it.
Yes.
But I never applied it.
You never applied the test?
Because later on, of course, I didn't apply the association test anymore because it wasn't necessary.
Yes.
I learned what I had to learn through it, but for the exact examination of psychical reactions, I think it is a very excellent means.
Yes, yes. Would you say, for example, that the practicing psychiatrist, the clinical psychologist, or the practicing psychiatrist could use these projective tests like the Rorschach?
For instance, for the education of a psychologist, a practical psychologist who is meant to do actual work with people, I think it's one of the best means to make him see how the unconscious works.
Is that right? The projective test?
Yeah, it's exceedingly didactic.
I see.
There you can demonstrate repression or the amnestic phenomena, the way in which people cover their emotions, and so on.
Yes, yes.
It is like an ordinary conversation, but seen and measured in its principles.
Yes.
And that makes it so interesting.
Yes. Yes.
You observe all the things you observe in a conversation.
Yes.
For instance, you ask people something, you discuss certain things, and you observe little hesitations, mistakes in speech, certain gestures. All that comes to the foreground in the, and measurable, you know, in the experiment. And so it is, I think I don't overrate the didactic value of it. I think very highly of it.
You?
Yes, and we still use it in the education of young aliens.
Yes, use it, I think.
Oh, you see, for instance, if I had a case that doesn't want to talk, I can make such an experiment that I find out a lot of things through the experiment.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have, for instance, discovered a murder.
Is that right?
Oh,
would you like to tell us a little bit more how this was done?
You have that lie detector in the United States.
Yes.
Well, that is the association test I have worked out with the psychogalactic phenomenon.
I see.
And we have done a lot of work also with the pneumograph to show the decrease of the volume of breathing under the influence of a complex.
I see.
That is one of the reasons of tuberculosis that arises from such a condition. People have a very shallow breathing, don't ventilate the apices of the lungs anymore, and get a tuberculosis. Half of the tuberculosis cases are psychic.
Yes, yes. Of course, this matter of psychic tubercular cases and so on, of course, gets us into a particularly interesting special case of motivation that we're talking a lot about in the United States today, and I'm sure that is interest to you also. This is the whole area of psychosomatic medicine, the way our unconscious, emotional elements of the total personality.
I have seen quite a lot of astounding cures of tuberculosis, chronic tuberculosis, by analysis, where people learn to breathe again. But it wouldn't have helped them if they had learned to breathe normally. That wouldn't have helped. But understanding what the complexes was, that has helped them.
Yes. Well, when did you first become interested in the psychic factors of tuberculosis? Was it many years ago? When did you first become interested in the psychic factors of tuberculosis?
I was an alienist to begin with. I was always interested.
Yes, you were.
Always interested, naturally.
Yes, yes. Now, of course...
presumably because I understood so little of it.
Yes.
Or I noticed that I understood so little.
Yes. Now, the point that this leads to very logically is the point I started making a moment ago. I was sorry to interrupt you. But you see, this is very much the heart of a lot of our thinking today, the area of what we call psychosomatic medicine.
Yes, sir.
Where we are now, right now, becoming more and more interested in the very thing you're saying, how these emotional, how these unconscious, how these personality factors can actually have an effect on the body.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, the classic examples in the United States in the past have been, for example, the peptic ulcer, where they believe this is a case of where these emotional factors have actually created pathology in the body.
Yes.
And, of course, we've extended these ideas into many other areas. We, for example, feel that where there already is pathology, that these emotional factors can intensify it.
Mm-hmm.
Not only can it create it, but it can intensify existing pathology. Or sometimes there may be actually symptoms of pathology without these patterns. Now, for example, many of our physicians, or as you say, alienists in America, say that 60 or 70% of their patients are not individuals who have anything that really physically is wrong with them, but they have disorders that are of psychosomatic origin.
Yeah, that's well known.
Well, yes.
Known since more than 50 years.
Yes.
But the question is how to cure them.
Now, what is the, speaking of these psychosomatic disturbances, And as you say, tuberculosis would be one example, and we are now, of course, very interested in further research in this matter in the United States, and for that matter in other parts of the world. Do you have any ideas as to why the patient selects this type of symptom for a problem? Why does he show his problem?
He doesn't select them.
He doesn't select
happen
them.
to him.
They happen to him.
Now you could ask Christus as well, when you are eaten by a crocodile, how you happen to select that crocodile.
Yes. Now
it hasn't selected you.
Yes. Now, of course, we mean this in a sense that unconsciously, why is selected?
No, not even unconsciously.
Not even consciously.
Not even unconsciously.
Yes. In other words, you don't believe that there's any way of tracing in the personality of the individual a reason why he must...
You see, that is an extraordinary exaggeration of the importance of the subject.
I see.
As if he were choosing such things.
Even unconsciously.
They get him.
Yes. Even unconsciously, there isn't this degree of free will. Yes, I see. I see. Now, in the whole matter of psychosomatic medicine, they have now, for example, very recently hinted that cancer may have psychosomatic involvement.
Yes.
This doesn't surprise you? That
not at all. We know these things since long, you know. That 50 years ago, we already had these cases, you know, ulcer of the stomach, tuberculosis, chronic arthritis, skin diseases.
Yes.
All psychogenous under certain conditions.
Yes. And even cancer, the fact that cancer may have...
Well, you see, I couldn't swear.
Yes.
But I have seen cases where I thought now I should wonder whether there was not a psychogenic reason for that particular ailment. It came too conveniently.
Too conveniently.
Yeah.
And so some of the studies that, for example, in the United States show that, for example, Jewish women practically never get cancer in the vaginal regions.
Yes.
We're more often to get cancer, say, in the breast regions, as one example.
Yes. Many things can be found out about cancer, I'm sure. You see, to us it was always a question how to treat these things, and anything is possible. Every disease has a psychological accompaniment.
Yes.
And it all depends, perhaps life depends upon it, whether you treat such a patient psychologically in the proper way or not.
Yes.
That can help tremendously.
Yes.
Even if you cannot prove in the least that the disease itself is psychogenous.
Yes.
Or you can have an infectious disease in a certain moment of a psychical ailment or predicament.
Yes.
Because you are particularly accessible to an infection.
Yes.
Because angina is such a typical psychological disease.
Yes. Yes.
Yet it is not psychological in its physical causation.
Yes. Yes.
It's just an infection.
Yes.
But why then? Well, it was a psychological moment.
Yes. Yes.
And you see, when it is established and there's high fever and an abscess, you cannot cure it by psychology.
Yes. Yes.
Yet it is quite possible that you can avoid it by a proper psychological attitude.
Yes. Yes. So all of this interest in psychosomatic medicine is pretty old stuff to you. You've been watching this for a long time.
These things are known here long ago.
Yes. Yes. And so you're not at all surprised by the new developments.
Well, for instance, the toxic aspect of schizophrenia.
Yes.
I had published it 50 years ago.
Yes.
Just 50 years ago.
Yes.
Now one discovers it.
Yes.
You see, you are far ahead in America with technological things, but in psychological matters and such things, you are 50 years back.
Yes.
things if you don't understand it. And that's a fact. I'm sorry, you see, I don't want to offend you. That's a general collective statement.
Yeah.
You know, you simply are not yet aware of what there is.
Yes.
There are plenty more things than people have an idea of. I told you that case of that theologian who didn't even know what a horoscope was and thought it was esotericism. You see, everyone who says that I'm a mystic, you know, is just an idiot.
Well,
he doesn't understand the first word of psychology.
Professor Jung, so you began to see, in a sense, your typologies led to a sort of a theory of a psychology of opposites, that the conscious would reveal one side of a type and the unconscious would be the other side.
Yeah.
And that this would be a very important way then of helping you to analyze and understand the individual.
Oh, right. Mostly it is quite, from a practical point of view, quite important. Well, the point I wanted to elucidate is, you know, in analyzing a patient, you make typical experiences. Namely, there is a sort of typical way in which the integration of consciousness takes place. Namely, the average way is that through the analysis of dreams, for instance, you become acquainted with the contents of the unconscious. I already told you this, to begin with, all personal material.
Yes.
Subjective questions, questions of the individual's difficulties in adapting to environmental conditions, and so on.
Yes.
Now, it is a regular observation that when you talk to an individual, and this individual gives you insight into its inner preoccupations, interests, emotions, in other words, hands over his personal complexes, then you get slowly and nilly-willy into the situation of a sort of authority, a point of, you become a point of reference. You know, you are in possession of all the important items in a person's development. I remember, for instance, I analyzed a very well-known American politician, and he told me, oh, any amount of the secrets of his trade. And suddenly he jumped up and said, by God, what have I done? You know, you get $1 million for what I have told you now. And I said, well, I'm not interested. You can sleep in peace, I shall not betray you. I forget it within a fortnight. Now you see, that shows that the things people hand out are not merely indifferent things. When it comes to something important, emotionally important, then they hand out themselves. They hand out a big emotional value, as if they were handing over a large sum, as if they were trusting you with the administration of their estate.
Yes.
And they're entirely in your hands.
Yes.
Often, I hear things that could ruin those people, utterly perfectly known. Or it would give me, if I should have any blackmailing tendencies, unlimited power to blackmail them. Now you see, that creates an emotional relationship to the analyst. And that is what Freud called the transference, yes, which is a central problem of analytic psychology. It is just so as if these people had handed out their whole existence, and that can have very peculiar effects upon the individual. Either they hate you for it or they love you for it, yeah. But you are not indifferent to them. And there is then a sort of emotional relation between the patient and the doctor. Yeah. Now, you know, when you hand out such materials, then you these contents are associated with all the important persons in the life of a patient. Now, the most important persons are usually father and mother. Yeah. That comes up from childhood. The first troubles are with the parents as a rule. So, in handing over your infantile memories about the father or about the mother, you hand over also the image of father and mother. Then it is just as if the doctor had taken the place of the father, yeah, even of the mother. Yeah. I had quite a number of male patients that called me Mother Jung because they handed over the mother to me. Yeah, yeah. Curiously enough. Yeah. But you see, that's quite irrespective of the personality of the analyst. It is simply disregarded. He functions as if he were the mother, or he functions as if he were the father, the central authority. And now that is what one calls transference. That is a particular case of projection. Yes. Now, yes, Freud doesn't exactly call it projection; he calls it transference. Yes. That is an allusion to the old and superstitious idea of handing over a disease, yes, transferring a disease upon an animal, or handing over the sin upon a scapegoat, and yes, the scapegoat takes it out into the desert and makes it disappear. Yes, yes. So they hand over themselves in the hope that I can swallow that stuff and digest it for them. And so I'm in loco parentis and have a high authority. Naturally, I'm also persecuted by the corresponding resistances, by all the manifold emotional reactions they have had against their parents. Now, that is the stuff you have to work through first in analyzing the situation, because a patient in such a condition is not free, he is the slave, he's utterly dependent upon the doctor, like a patient with an open abdomen on the operation table. Yeah. He is in the hands of the surgeon for better or worse, and so the thing must be finished, and so we have to work through that condition in the hope that we arrive in a situation where the patient is able to see that I'm not the father or not the mother, that I am an ordinary human being. Now, everybody naturally should assume that such a thing would be possible. For instance, that a patient could arrive at such an insight when he's not a complete idiot, that I am just a doctor and not that emotional figure of their fantasies. But that is very often not the case. So I had a case that was an intelligent young woman. She was a student of philosophy, very good mind, where one could expect easily that she would see that I am not parental authority. But she was utterly unable to get out of this delusion. And in such a case, one always has recourse to the dreams. It is just as if one would ask the unconscious, now what do you say to such a condition? You see, she says of the unconscious, of course I know you are not my father, but I just feel like that, it is like that, I depend upon you. And I say, now you see what the unconscious says. Now the unconscious produces dreams in which I really assume a very curious role. You know, she was a little infant, she was sitting on my knees, I held her in my arms, I was a very tender father to the little girl, you know, and more, her dreams became emphatic in that respect, namely that I was a sort of giant, and she is a very little, frail human thing, you know, and quite a little girl in the hands of an enormous being. And the last dream of that series was, I cannot tell you all the dreams, was that it was out in nature, I stood in a field of wheat, an enormous field of wheat that was ripe for harvest. And I was a giant, and I held her in my arm like a baby. And the wind was blowing over that field of wheat. Now you know, when the wind is blowing over wheat field, these waves in the wheat field. And with these waves, I swayed like that, putting her as if it were to sleep, you know. And she felt as being in the arms of the Godhead. And I thought, now the harvest is ripe, and I must tell her. And I told her, you see, what you want and what you project into me, because you are not conscious of it, is you have the idea of a deity. You don't possess. Therefore you see it in me. That clicked. Because, you know, she had a rather intense religious education. Of course, it all vanished later on. And something disappeared from her world. Her world became merely personal. And that religious conception of the world was non-existent, apparently. But, you see, the idea of a deity is not an intellectual idea, it is an archetype, it's an archetypal idea. Therefore, you find it practically everywhere under this or another name. You know, even if it has the name mana, it is an all-powerful, extraordinary effect or quality, even if it's not personal at all. And so she suddenly became aware of an entirely heathenish image that comes fresh from the archetype. She had not the idea of a Christian God or of an Old Testament Yahweh. It was a heathenish God. You see, a God of nature, of vegetation. He was the wheat himself. He is the spirit of the wheat, the spirit of the wind. And she was in the arms of that Newman. No. Now, that is the living experience of an archetype. Now, that made a tremendous impression upon that girl, and instantly it clicked. She saw what she really was missing, that missing value, that was in the form of a projection in myself and made myself indispensable to her. And then she saw, it is not indispensable, because it is, as the dream says, she is in the arms of that archetypal idea. Now that is a luminous experience, you see. And that is the thing that people are looking for.
Yes.
An archetypal experience that gives them an incorruptible value. You see, they depend upon other conditions, they depend upon their desires, their ambitions, depend upon other people, because they have no value in themselves, they have nothing in themselves, they are only rational, and they are not in the possession of a treasure that would make them independent. But when that girl can hold that experience, then she doesn't depend anymore. She cannot depend anymore because that value is in herself, and that is a sort of liberation.
Yes.
And that is, of course, makes her complete, you know. Inasmuch as she can realize such a luminous experience, she is able to continue her path, her way, her individuation. The acorn can become an oak and not a donkey. Nature will take her course. She will become that which she is from the beginning. Now, having seen such cases, quite a number of such cases, that of course has given me a motive to study the archetypes, because I began to see that the structure of what I then call the collective unconscious is really a sort of agglomeration of such typical images, of which each has a numinous quality, you know. The archetypes are at the same time dynamic. They are instinctual images that are not intellectually invented. They are always there, and they produce certain processes in the unconscious one could best compare with myths. That's the origin of mythology. Mythology is a pronouncing of series of images that formulate the life of archetypes. And so the statements of every religion, of many poets and so on, are statements about the inner mythological process, which is a necessity, because man is not complete if he is not conscious of that aspect of things. So, you see, a man is not complete when he lives in a world of statistical truth. He must live in a world of his biological truth. That is his biological truth. That is not merely statistics. It is the expression of what he really is, as what he feels himself. So you see, somebody without the mythology is merely an effect of statistics, as it were. It is an average phenomenon. And while the truth is, the carriers of life are individuals, not average numbers.
Yes.
Yet our natural science makes everything to an average, reduces everything to an average, and of course all the individual qualities are wiped out. That of course is most unbecoming, it is unhygienic. It deprives people of their specific values where they are individuals. It deprives them of the most important experiences of their life, where they experience their own value, namely the creative background of their personality. Now see, the trouble is that nobody understands these things apparently. That's quite strange.
Do you think that the humanities are important for the individual who wants to study the individual?
One doesn't see what an education without humanities is doing to man.
Yes.
He loses the connection with his family, as it were. That means with the whole stem, the tribe, the connection with the past. That he lives in that in which man always has lived. Man has always lived in the midst. And we think we are able to be born today and to live in no myth, without history. That is a disease. That's absolutely abnormal, because man is not born every day. He is once born in a specific historical setting with the specific historical qualities, and therefore he is only complete when he has a relation to these things. It's just as if you were born without eyes and ears, when you are growing up with no connection with the past. From with the standpoint of natural science, you need no connection with the past. You can wipe it out.
Yes, yes.
And that is a mutilation of the human being. Now I saw through my practical experience that this kind of proceeding had a most extraordinary therapeutical effect. I can tell you such a case. That was a young Jewish girl, and her father was a banker, and she had received an entirely worldly education. She had no idea of any tradition or so. And then I went further into her history and found out that her grandfather had been a tzaddik in Galicia, and when I knew that, I knew the whole story. That girl suffered from a phobia, a terrific phobia, and she has been in a psychoanalytic treatment already with no effect. And she was really badly plagued by that phobia, anxiety states of all sorts. And then I saw that girl has lost the connection with the past, has lost, for instance, the fact that her grandfather was a tzaddik, that he lived in the myth, and her father has fallen out of it too. So I simply told her, you see, you understand what your fear is? You know what you have lost? And she didn't, of course not. I said, your fear is the fear of your way. You know, the effect was that within a week she was cured from so many years of bad anxiety states. Because you see, that went like a lightning through her. But I only could say it because I knew that she is absolutely lost. She thought she was in the middle of things, but she was lost, gone. Made no sense. What is our existence? You know, when we are just average numbers. You know, the more you make people to average numbers, the more you destroy our society.
Yes.
The ideal state is then a slave state. Then you can go to Russia. There's wonderful. There you can be a number, but one pays it very dearly. Our whole life goes into blazes. Okay. And so here I have plenty of cases of a similar kind. And that has naturally led me on to a profound study of the archetypes. But now, by Jove, that thing should be taken into account. That is an enormous factor, very important for our further development and for our well-being. Now, in it was of course difficult to know where to begin, because this is such an enormously extended field, and the next question I asked myself was, now where in the world has anybody been busy with that problem? And I found nobody, except a peculiar spiritual movement that went together with the beginnings of Christianity, namely the Gnostics. And that was the first thing I said, and then I saw they were concerned with the problem of archetypes and made a peculiar philosophy of it. As everybody makes a peculiar philosophy of it when he comes across it naively and doesn't know that those are structural elements of the unconscious psyche. Now they have lived in the first, second, and third century, and what was in between? Nothing. And now today we certainly fall into that hole and are confronted by the problems of the collective unconscious, which were then the same in 2000 years ago, and we are not prepared to meet that problem. I was always looking for something in between, you know, something that linked that remote past with the present moment, and I found, to my amazement, it is alchemy. That is understood to be a history of chemistry. It is, one could almost say nothing less than that. It is a peculiar spiritual movement or philosophical movement. They call themselves philosophers, like Gnosticism. And then I read the whole accessible literature, Latin and Greek, studied it because it was enormously interesting. It is the mental work of 1,700 years in which there is stored up all they could make out about the nature of the archetypes in a peculiar way. That's true. It is not simple, and most of the texts are not published. No more published since the Middle Ages. The last editions are in the middle or end of the 16th century, all in Latin, and some texts are in Greek, and not a few very important ones. Now, that has given me no end of work, but the result was most satisfactory, because it showed me the development of our unconscious relations to the collective unconscious, and the variations our consciousness has undergone while being unconsciously concerned with these mythological images. For instance, such phenomena as in Hitler or so, you know, that's are psychical phenomena, and we've got to understand these things. It is just as so as if a terrific epidemic of typhoid fever were breaking out, and we say, now this is typhoid fever. Isn't that a marvelous disease? It can take on enormous dimensions, and nobody knows anything about it. Nobody takes care of the water supply. Nobody thinks of of examining the meat or something like that, one simply states that this is a phenomenon, yes, but one doesn't understand it. And to me, of course, it was an enormous problem because it is a factor that has determined the fate of millions of European people and of Americans. It is, nobody can deny that he has been influenced by the war. But that is all Hitler's doing, and that's all psychology, our foolish psychology. But you only come to an understanding of these things when you understand the background,
yes,
from which it springs.
Yes.
And so, of course, I cannot tell you in detail about about alchemy. It is the basis of our modern way of perceiving things, and therefore it is as if it were right under the threshold of consciousness. This is a wonderful picture of how the development of archetypes, that means the movement of archetypes, looks, when you look upon them as if from above, maybe from today, you look back into the past and you see how the present moment has evolved out of the past. It is just as if the alchemistic philosophy, it sounds very curious. We should give it an entirely different name. It has a different name, it's called Hermetic philosophy. Of course, that conveys just as little as the term alchemy.
Yeah.
It is the parallel development, as Gnosticism was, to the conscious development, say, of Christianity, of our Christian philosophy, of the whole psychology of the Middle Ages. And so, you see, in our days, we have such and such view of the world, such and such a philosophy, but in the unconscious we have a different one. And that we can see through the example of the alchemistic philosophy that behaves towards the medieval consciousness exactly like the unconscious behaves to ourselves. And we can construct or even predict our the unconscious of our days when we know what it has been yesterday. Now that is, with a few words, the development of my ideas. Without going into detail, I couldn't further
yes, well, you have gone into great detail elsewhere, though, much of your writing, of course. Yes.
Well, people have to read the books finally,
yes, that's right.
in spite of the fact that they are thick.
And we're hoping.
I'm sorry.